In this video, we're going to see how Graphite Studio can be used to create complex enterprise-class web applications. We'll be going over the following: complex object models with features such as inheritance and polymorphism, behaviors that process heavy-duty business logic, exposing REST and SOAP services and how they are documented, unit testing via the Arrange-Act-Assert framework, role-based authorization, and how a perfect third normal form database is generated via the Entity Framework ORM model. The project we'll be reviewing is called Franklin NFIP. NFIP stands for National Flood Insurance Program. It's an insurance program operated by FEMA. Let's take a look at the requirements document before we start building the application. Here is a PDF of about 600 pages that FEMA has released to process its flood insurance program. Starting on page 85, the next 20 pages cover how the premium is calculated for this flood insurance program. Now we're going to look at the rate tables that this premium will need to calculate, based on the rates that are provided here. There are approximately 47. Also provided in this document is the flood insurance application that a customer needs to fill in order to buy flood insurance. If we go to page 115, we will see all the test cases that have to be matched when the system is built. Here we have 15 test cases with the coverage and all other relevant information, as well as the final calculations, which will have to match. Now, let's go take a look at the web application that was built using Graphite Studio. Here we have the login screen. Let's first log in as the system administrator. When the system administrator logs in, they are automatically taken to the user maintenance screen. As you can see, there are 4 users that exist currently in this sample application. One operation designated to the system administrator is the managing of security groups. Here we can see a list of all the security groups, as well as a list of all the views available in the application. The administrator has the ability to allow or deny any security group access to every individual view in the application. In this case, the security group agent has access to the new business home view and every element on the page. If needed, the system administrator can control security at a granular level. For example, they can go into the content of the page and choose which specific elements an agent has access to. Next, we'll log in as an agent and see what they can do. When an agent logs in, they are taken to a different screen. This screen shows all the pending applications. We will review these icons when we look at role-based authorization. Right now, we are going to take a look at the Get Quote link. When this is clicked, the user is taken to the Quick Quote screen. Here they can run a quote for a flood insurance policy. I'll fill some information in quickly. In this case, there'll be $60,000 in coverage for the building and $10,000 of coverage for the contents. When I click Quote, I see the premium that was calculated. And under that, there are 7 different calculations based on different deductibles. Graphite Studio has the ability to produce complex, high-performance, and scalable applications. For example, when I push Quote, the response is nearly instantaneous, despite the 20 pages worth of calculations that are going into determining this number. The agent can push the Apply button to finish this application. Here, the tabbed interface lets the agent fill in the information in a well-organized structure. The agent can click through the tabs by pushing Next. And on the last page, they can click Submit. This displays a summary of the premium that has been calculated. Here the customer can sign and apply for the policy. Once the application is applied, it is now moved to the underwriter's desk. The agent has the capability to upload documents to an application. They also have the ability to view all the documents that apply to this policy. What we'll do next is look at role-based authorization. Suppose the management of this insurance company decides that agents shouldn't have the ability to view attachments of an application. In this case, the system administrator will log in, go to the Manage Security Groups page. They'll choose the security group and screen they want to edit access to, navigate to the specific view element that needs to be restricted, and here they can uncheck the View Attachments link. The next time the agent logs in, they will not be able to access the View Attachments link. All the security group functionality we just covered comes pre-built in any Graphite Studio application. Now we'll jump into Graphite Studio to review the NFIP project. Let's take a look at the object model. First, we'll look at the entity called Application. Application has these properties that form the entity. They can be simple properties or complex properties. By clicking on the type of property, you can navigate to the object that defines that property. Now let's go over some tabs you see here. The Properties tab defines all the properties of the application entity. The Behavior tab lists all the behaviors that pertain to this entity. The Diagram tab shows a composite picture of the application entity and where the application entity is being used as a property. If I click on Policy, you can see the application is a property of policy. If I go to the sidebar and click on the diagram icon, the screen that shows up will show all the entities that are defined within the project. Here, you see an entity called Agency. Agency is inherited from the entity Company. Under Agency, you have two icons. The brain icon indicates that Agency has behaviors attached to it, and the table grid icon indicates that Agency has sample data within it. Let's click the Agency entity. This switch indicates that the Agency entity was modeled after the Company entity. All the gray properties are the properties of Agency that were inherited from Company. The list of agents, as defined by the agent entity here, is a new property that was added to the Agency entity. Number of type text was also added to the Agency entity. If we go to the Data tab, notice there is one seed data entry entered for the Agency entity. When you create the database, this will create a row in the database. Now let's take a look at how Graphite Studio builds complex business logic in a visual manner. To do that, I'll search for the Quick Quote view in the search bar. As you can see, the Quick Quote view has the quote button. By pushing Ctrl and clicking the button, I can see the properties of the button. And here is an on-click behavior that determines what happens when this button is clicked. If I select this, it will bring us to the flowchart that is the logic of this button. The flowchart is composed of different shapes. This particular shape is a run behavior. It invokes other flowcharts. In this case, the flowchart is called Calculate Rating. I'm going to click on this icon here to navigate to this flowchart. The Calculate Rating flowchart calls 8 flowcharts that consist of the 20 pages worth of calculations. If we select Determine Rate and navigate to the flowchart, we'll see the logic behind it. As you can see, it returns a certain number of rates back to the caller. Determine Rate calls another flowchart called Find Rate Table. This flowchart is a complex flowchart that picks the right rate table based on the entries made on the quote screen. The next item is a special feature in Graphite Studio that supports good object-oriented practices. It is a polymorphic call that is capable of calling one of these 6 flowcharts, which is decided at runtime. Going back to the sidebar and selecting Diagram, here you can see an entity called Rate Group. This has no properties and no behaviors. What it has is something called a template named FindRate. When clicked, it shows that it defines a certain set of inputs and a certain set of outputs. What this means is that if any object or entity inherits from this rate group, it needs to implement a flowchart named FindRate that takes the same inputs and returns the same outputs. Going back to the entity inheritance diagram, you will see that the rate group 0 is inheriting from rate group. So it has to implement the FindRate flowchart. The FindRate flowchart for rate group 0 is fairly simple, possibly handling the rates for a property that is not near a body of water. But if we look at rate group 2, we see that the information about its rates is more extensive. Rate group 2 also has a FindRate, but the flowchart behind it is much more complex. However, during determineRate, we simply call the FindRate on the base class, which is not really a flowchart. But an instance entry, we pass the matching rate table. So at runtime, the software will decide whether it's rate group 0 or 2 and navigate to the appropriate process. This shows how Graphite handles polymorphism. Graphite Studio also documents the call stack of all these behaviors in a robust fashion. Here we have the NFIP insurance data entity that contains the calculate rating behavior. By clicking on this icon, we open a diagram that shows where calculate rating has been invoked, and what are the other flowcharts that it itself invokes. This is a clear map of what calculate rating does. As you can see, it does some complex processing. For example, if we want to see what determine ICC premium is, we click this box and it takes us to the flowchart that calculates the ICC premium. Next, we will look at how easily we can expose web services using Graphite Studio. I'm going to navigate to the calculate rating flowchart. If I wanted to expose this behavior as a web service, all I have to do is click this icon and a dialog box pops up that asks whether the flowchart should be exposed as SOAP and/or REST. If I set both SOAP and REST to yes, the dialog box will expand and reveal some more options to configure REST. Here, I'll choose the HTTP method, and I'll also fill in the URI. I'll click OK and save. The next time I build, it will generate an endpoint. If I use the sidebar to navigate to services, I can see all the documentation behind all the web services that have been exposed in this project. If I go to NFIP insurance data, you can see that calculate rating has been exposed. These are the inputs it expects, and these are the outputs. If I click the link, Graphite will display the WSDL information behind that service. If I want to look at the REST documentation, I can click on the REST link. Here, Graphite shows all the REST methods that have been exposed in this project. As you can see, calculate rating shows up here. If I double click this link, it actually takes us to the Swagger Open API documentation. If I expand application, here's the documentation related to calculate rating. Now we'll review the unit testing feature in Graphite Studio. Graphite provides the capability to create entities that contain test behaviors. Here's an entity called Rating Tester, which contains unit test behaviors. Let's take a look at one of these. Run test case 1 follows the testing framework Arrange, Act, and Assert. Here we are arranging the data. In other words, we are creating an object that contains all of our test data. We're going to act on that data by calling Calculate Rating, which is the behavior we are testing in this flowchart. And finally, we are asserting the data that has come back from that Calculate Rating call. Graphite provides a way to invoke these tests and show the result. If I go to Test on the sidebar, it takes us to a screen where I can choose these test flowcharts. In this case, I'll run test case 1. When I click Run, the results show up, and these are the assertions. If any of these were to fail, this icon would display in red. If that was to happen, I would navigate to that flowchart, set it to debug mode, and fix the problem. Graphite also shows an expanded version of all the outputs that come back from the test flowchart. The last thing we'll cover is the data model behind the project. Here's the Franklin NFIP database, and these are all the tables that were generated by Graphite using Entity Framework. Let's take a look at the application table. Here it is with its columns. For example, Event Registration ID. This column provides us with several auditing features. It's a one-to-one relationship with a system table called Event Registration, which shows us who added a record, who modified it, and who executed a business transaction on the record. We'll go over that more in another video. Also associated with the application table is another table called the Application History Table, which maintains the history of every row with a version number attached to it. This allows applications built with Graphite to comply with Sarbanes-Oxley without any coding effort or flowcharts to create history behind all your data. And that's everything we're going to review in this video. Thanks for watching.